Very encouraging news, which I'll leave until the end of my presentation. The fish community objectives for Lake Huron, although they are 20 years old, include a couple of sea lamprey reduction specific goals. And we've identified targets to support those goals, namely suppression of sea lampreys to reach an adult sea lamprey abundance index of 24,113 and a marking rate of less than 5 marks per 100 lake trout greater than 532 millimeters. I'll begin with a review of our 2015 control program highlights. The application of selective lampricides that target larvae in their natal streams and lentic areas remains a focus of the sea lamprey control program. In fact, in the last 6 years or so, we've increased our efforts in Lake Huron significantly. And 2015 was no exception. We treated 28 tributaries and 6 lentic areas, including 300 hectares of larval habitat in the St. Mary's River. In addition, 2015 was the second year of a large-scale treatment strategy that targeted Lakes Michigan and Lake Huron, and we treated an additional 5 Lake Huron tributaries, including the Pine River, Osable River, Silver Creek, Shiawassee River, and the Spanish River. We had plans to treat the Garden River, but during the time scheduled to treatment, we had very high water and low temperatures, so that treatment was deferred. It'll be picked up in 2016. Although the Commission has invested a lot of money into research of alternative control methods, including electrical guidance systems, selective spawning phase traps, pheromone attractants and repellents, the only operational alternative that we currently have to lampricides is the construction of low-head barriers that block sea lamprey spawning migrations. In 2015, no new sea lamprey barriers were constructed. However, DFO crews performed routine maintenance on 11 Lake Huron sea lamprey barriers, while Fish and Wildlife Service crews inspected 139 dams in Lake Huron streams and ground truth data in the barrier inventory and project selection system database. The service also consulted partner agencies to ensure blockage at 11 sites in 5 streams. There are 3 rehabilitation projects that were initiated or ongoing in 2015, including work on the Sheboygan River Lock. The service, the Army Corps of Engineers, and Michigan DNR continued to discuss ways to lamprey-proof the Sheboygan River Lock prior to a planned refurbishment. As well, Fike net surveys and mark recapture studies indicated a small, potentially landlocked spawning population in the upper river. And work on these 2 initiatives will continue in 2016. Denny's Dam is an old mill dam that was reconstructed in 1970 as a sea lamprey control structure on the Saugeen River, and it currently protects over 100 kilometers of the watershed from sea lamprey infestation. Engineering surveys in the mid-2000s indicated that the dam was in a state of deterioration and that there was undermining at the toe of the dam. Plans to refurbish the structure beginning in 2012 were postponed because of concerns raised by Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, whose traditional territory the dam is located. I'm pleased to announce that dialogue with Saugeen Ojibwe Nation has been reignited, thanks largely to the efforts of Commissioner Jim McCain, who reached out to SON to gauge interest in revisiting the project last summer. This led to a meeting in Ann Arbor between representatives from the Commission and SON, who formally agreed to work collaboratively to specifically address sea lamprey control objectives. Then in December, there was a site meeting attended by representatives of the two groups, including engineers. And the purpose was to discuss project impacts and review previous reconstruction plans. And currently, the Commission and Saugeen engineers are working together to develop a rehabilitation plan that addresses Saugeen's concerns regarding environmental and cultural impacts while ensuring that Denny's Dam remains an effective sea lamprey barrier. The Nicolston Dam is an old mill dam on the Nottawasaga River that protects about 70 kilometers from sea lamprey infestation. Unfortunately, during a site visit by our engineering staff last summer, it was determined that this structure is also in a state of disrepair. We're planning engineering studies as a follow-up in 2016. The service and the department deliver a comprehensive assessment program that evaluates various life stages of the sea lamprey, including larval, juvenile, and adult phases. Larval assessments are critical in guiding lampricide control efforts. And in 2015, crews conducted surveys on 100 Lake Huron tributaries in 14 lentic areas to rank these water bodies for possible treatment in 2016 and determine larval distribution. To detect the presence of new populations in previously uninfested streams, evaluate efficacy of the 2014-15 treatments, and evaluate barrier effectiveness. And finally, to estimate the St. Mary's River larval population following the 2015 treatments. That population was estimated at 721,000 plus or minus 600,000. DFO conducts a relative index assessment of parasitic juvenile sea lampreys in northern Lake Huron with the assistance of the Commercial Fishery and Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. As well, a number of agencies, including Michigan DNR, OMNRF, USGS, and Chippewa Resource Authority provide marking data on an annual basis. That's analyzed by Ted Tresca of the Fish and Wildlife Service office in Green Bay. Adult assessment crews operate 6 traps on index streams around Lake Huron, and the data gathered from these traps is used to evaluate the success of the program by contrasting index estimates with prescribed targets for adult abundance. In 2015, it was the first year that we employed an index approach. It replaced the previous regression model that estimated lake-wide abundance from a variety of data sources. The way we calculate the Lake Huron index is we sum all the mark recapture estimates from the 6 index traps. And these traps, or these sites, were selected based on a long history of spawning migrations and successful trapping effort. This table presents trapping data collected from 2013 to 2015. And you'll notice that in 2013 or 2015, the catch was quite low relative to the other years. In fact, the catch in the St. Mary's River was the lowest in the time series. And you might think at first glance that it's because of the reduction of trap sites from 15 to 6. But if we only look at the traps on the index streams, we find that in 2013 and 14, those trap catches accounted for 97 and 98% of the total catch respectively. So by adopting an index approach, we decrease the amount of effort that we have to employ without sacrificing a lot of a significant amount of data. And we've also increased the precision estimates around the estimates or the precision around the estimates of abundance, because we only use mark recapture data from those 6 index streams. It's become readily apparent that suppression of the large larval population in the St. Mary's River is a very critical component to sea lamprey control efforts in Lake Huron. And this figure shows the history of treatment effort and larval population estimates in the St. Mary's River between 1999 and 2015. The first blue dot is the pre-control estimate of 5.2 million. In 1999, there was a large-scale treatment indicated by the first green dashed line of over 700 hectares of larval habitat in the St. Mary's River. This dramatically reduced the larval population relatively quickly. The yellow dots represent post-treatment assessments of the larval population. Between 1999 and 2010 and 11, when the next large-scale treatments were applied, we conducted a number of what we called maintenance treatments of about 100 hectares per year. During this time period, we were also employing sterile male release technique as an alternative method. And as you can see, we didn't achieve the suppression that was necessary to really have an impact on the population in Lake Huron. In 2012, the sterile male release technique was discontinued. However, we increased our annual treatments to 300 hectares. And in the last 5 years, we've had the lowest estimates of sea lamprey abundance in the time series. In 2015, that estimate, as I said before, was 724,000, which seems low relative to the other estimates, but it's still a lot of larvae. We also conduct, on an annual basis, an out-migrating juvenile fyke net index on the St. Mary's River. And this graph shows catch per unit effort of those juvenile sea lamprey between 1996 and 2015. We had a slight upturn in 2015. We captured a total of 27 juveniles over a 6-week period, but still it's among one of the lowest catch per unit efforts, or it's actually juvenile catch per net day in the time series. As well, we annually conduct egg viability studies in the St. Mary's River Rapids. And this figure shows, again, the time series of those egg viability studies between 1993 and 2015. And the vertical dashed yellow line represents the cessation of SMERD in 2012. And we can see a significant increase in egg viability. It went from 32% prior to 2012 on average to 67%. We've also seen an increase in the proportion of age 1 larvae in the larval population in those last 4 years. And now what you've all been waiting for, sea lamprey status in Lake Huron. I've got a series of graphs to show you. Our primary metric to gauge success of the program is an index of adult sea lamprey abundance. And in 2015, we had an estimate of 23,968, the lowest in the time series, and it represents the first time in 30 years that we've reached our suppression target. So this is cause for guarded celebration, I guess, if you will. If we look at our relative abundance of in catch per unit effort of feeding juveniles in northern Lake Huron, there's been a long downward decline, which seems to coincide with the large-scale balicide treatments on the St. Mary's River. And we haven't calculated the 2015 estimate yet, but the 2014 point was the lowest in the time series. And based on returns from the commercial fishery this year, we expect the catch per unit effort to be even lower in 2015. Finally, this graph shows sea lamprey marks per 100 lake trout greater than 532 millimeters between 1984 and 2015. And this is hot off the presses. We had a marking rate of 3.9 per 100 lake trout in 2015. Again, the first time that we've met our suppression target in over 30 years. We'll talk briefly about plans for 2016. From a lamprey control perspective, we have 23 treatments scheduled, as well as 3 treatments of lentic areas. These include 308 hectares in the St. Mary's River. We plan to operate and maintain 13 sea lamprey barriers in Lake Huron, conduct site visits to inspect structures and gather data for the BIPSS database, continue collaborative investigations of the Sheboygan Lock, continue consultation with SON on proposed rehabilitation of Denny's Dam, and conduct feasibility studies at the Nicolston Dam. From an assessment perspective, larval assessment crews will survey roughly 100 streams and 20 lentic areas around Lake Huron, as well as the St. Mary's River. We'll continue to conduct standardized fight net assessments of out-migrating juveniles in the St. Mary's River, and continue work to assess feeding juveniles and marking on lake trout and with other agencies and commercial fishers. Adult assessment crews will continue to operate and conduct mark recapture estimates on 6 index streams and perform egg viability studies in the St. Mary's River Rapids. I'd like to acknowledge contributions from Sean Nowicki and Ted Tresca, the Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as Pete Rohde and Mike Siefkas with the Commission.